Welcome to our October 20th Curriculum Subcommittee meeting. Myself, Helen Charlevsky, Barbara Scotto are the members of the school committee, and we're joined today by Michelle Herman and Emily Speck, as well as Robin Coyne. And we are going to be getting an update on the hybrid model today, but we have some minutes from October 6th. Hopefully members of the committee have had an opportunity to review the minutes.
I'll move them. I did read them.
All right, I will second them.
Excuse me, Jennifer, just if you want to make a quick announcement.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry, Robin, and you did just remind me, and so I apologize. For the members of the public and for members of the meeting, we are being recorded, so that means that also this will be available to members of the community on a future date at JAG. Thank you, Robin. Sorry, so we have a motion and a second. Let's take a vote on the minutes. Helen?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
And I vote yes, so that's a unanimous vote, so the minutes are approved. All right, so I think that we are ready for our update. Unless there are any other questions or issues, I think, Michelle, the floor is yours. I want to first thank you, for coming. I know it's an incredibly busy time. Today we opened up schools. Yesterday was a professional development day for our educators, and today was the first day going into our hybrid model, so this timing is fantastic for getting an update. So we look forward to, the pedagogy behind it and what, what our status is today. So I'm sorry, now the floor is officially yours. Thank you.
And thank you. I actually was speaking with Emily before and I was like, well, if you want to come with me, I know it's the first day. So I think one thing to definitely put out there is today is the first day of the hybrid model. So I think there could be a shift in many of the things that we talk about today, just as we learn and process our way through the model. I do have your list of bullets, so I'll kind of run through them, but if there are pieces or questions you have along the way. So the pedagogical model, one of the things that happened was we have been sitting with the curriculum coordinators and looking at our curriculum for the year and saying, what's the best way to support teachers who now have students in the classroom 2.5 days a week, and students at home 2 days, or vice versa. And how our big goal was to support that. We didn't want teachers initially to sit down and look at curriculum and say, I have to plan the lesson for the in the class, and then I have to plan the lesson for the students that are out of the class. So what we did as a curriculum group was to really discuss, so what does that mean for students? And if we look at the students over a 2-week period of time, they're in for 10 days. So we came up with a recommended model to work with teachers to plan for this environment. And the 10-day model really started out as looking at your objectives so that after 10 days of instruction, what will every student in the class be taught, engaged in, assessed on? And over those 10 days, how is that going to be delivered? And what we really discovered was that if we thought about a 10-day period of time, that if we intentionally sat down and said, if all students are going to reach these objectives, what are the 10 days going to look like? What are the days when they're in class and what are the days when they're remote? So that we could plan the lessons across 10 days, 5 intentionally being remote lessons and 5 intentionally being in-class lessons, that would help support the planning process for teachers and provide students continued instruction at home. And so we use our LMS systems, which are learning management systems, and we have Google for 3 through 12. We have Google 3 through 5. We have Canvas 6 through 12, and we have Seesaw at K-2. And so what we sat down as a group and did was to determine, and Emily was a big part of this, is to determine what is the planning structure to be able to deliver this so that students are engaging in in-person lessons where they are having the regular strategies that we use for instruction versus the types of strategies that work best in a remote setting. And we actually created a document that would support teachers with that planning, taking them through the steps of planning, identifying which strategies are best to be used remotely, which strategies are best to be used in person, and then which ones kind of cross over and can be used as both. And so when you talk about a pedagogical practice, we still want the instruction to happen pedagogically as we would expect at any time. We are trying to work with teachers to think about this as all instruction is synchronous or asynchronous, even in the classroom. And therefore, how do we continue to use our strategies that we know are effective? But we also recognize that we had to help identify specifically what are the strategies that work better in certain situations versus others. And so that being said, we also began to offer professional development over the last 2 weeks after school. We have some CARES Act money still available. And so our goal was to walk teachers through this planning process. I'm going to be totally transparent because I know that one of the things you were asked about were the challenges. When the coordinator started to meet with teachers, and Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but as we started to meet with teachers, we recognized that they were still thinking about this as being, again, like a first day of school type thing, and that it's the first time in their classrooms. And I'm going to shut my camera off because I'm very unstable and I keep getting shut out of Zoom meetings today. So let me just shut that off. But that we found out that teachers needed to think about basic needs in the classroom. How do you move students around in the classroom? How do you create those structures that provide the community building, especially because the morning meetings are happening with the students at home and the students in the classroom? How do we have students transition with materials, especially because when an art teacher comes into the room and they're passing out materials, how do you keep those materials separated out? So what we realized was we have to address those first and work with teachers to feel really comfortable about those basic needs and setting up those routines in their classroom, just like we would at the beginning of the year. Then it will allow for the space to put more emphasis in the planning process. So I just want to be really clear about that. The one thing that we think is a real benefit of this model is that if a student also were home on any given day, or we had students that had to quarantine, that they would have the opportunity to get at the instruction that's happening in the classroom through the learning management system, as well as the students who are in person. The idea is to continue to house all of the instruction there. So I'm going to stop there for a second and see what kinds of questions bubble up for you before I sort of move on to the list.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Helen. You want to start?
Well, no, if you wanted to, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That last piece that you just said about students at home, if they have to be at home, they get, how does that happen? Can you be a little more explicit?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we are loading our lessons onto the learning management system, it's something that we have never had the opportunity to do before when we're in-person learnings. Many teachers did use a learning management system before, but not everybody. So everybody learned how to use the system while we were remote full time. So for an example, and I had an example I think I showed at the last school committee meeting, but I didn't click on any of the links. When Emily is planning a lesson, she may put the PowerPoint to the lesson and the journal entry for the lesson and the student discussion question for the lesson right into the learning management system. And when students go to write their journal, they click on it in the learning management system. The benefit of putting her PowerPoint there is that students could always go back to it and see it again and work their way through that lesson at a slower pace, or students might be moving at a faster pace. And so if I'm home, I don't necessarily get to see the teacher flip through the PowerPoint, but I have access to the material so that I can still keep up with the lesson that my class is doing. And the students that are at home that day who are remote, they actually may be doing that exact same thing through that lesson. Emily, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the idea, the way I think about it is that we're creating all of these building blocks that students are going to put together to create really strong understanding in their content area. And those building blocks students may get pieces of those building blocks at different times or in slightly different ways, but they get all of the same building blocks over 10 days and they build the same understanding and structure over those 10 days. And it gives teachers a lot of tools and flexibility based on the subject they're teaching and the kinds of work that they want students to be doing to build that understanding, to use their learning management system and these different tools to create a cohesive experience while students are moving in and out of the classroom.
So I'm sorry, Barbara, I just saw your hand. Do you want to ask your question? And I can do a follow-up.
This is a follow-up question that I'm just trying to clarify. So the learning management system has on it, on the computer, all of the things that the students might need, not necessarily will need, but might need to access. But that's not a place where you as a teacher are putting your lesson plans or notes to you, or I just want to clarify that that's what you're talking about.
It's a student delivery system. So it's a place,
We lost you, Michelle.
You're just muted, I think.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, my computer keeps, I think it's the internet in my building that's a problem. And I ran home to do this here because of negotiations this afternoon. So it's a housing site. So it's kind of like carrying your Trapper Keeper, and everything your teacher hands you, you put in your Trapper Keeper, but it's electronic. But it also gives an opportunity that if you are not in person for any reason, even on an in-person day, you have access to the material.
So can I just follow up? So are students getting the same lesson at school live? So we'll call those in-person, in-school days. And the students who are at home are getting the same lesson, but in an asynchronous way, or are they going to be sort of staggered? So like, for example, you might teach math lesson 1.1 live, right? And then 1.2 live, and then redo that Thursday and Friday 1.1 and 1.2, which means that one group is staggered a few days later so that you can do certain lessons live versus in person. And then maybe the follow-up work is the asynchronous on the off days.
And I think that's really dependent on the content area. So like one of the things is Emily and I, Emily last week were talking about before school committee, and she mapped out one that did exactly what you just said. Like students are gonna do lesson 1.1 and 1.2 in person, and while students are at home, they have 2 other lessons to do that the group that's in school on Monday and Tuesday will do when they're home. Joanna, when talking to her about the ELA that she has, the way, because we've purchased materials for students this year that allow that instruction to keep going, that teachers have pre-recorded videos from Teachers College and pre-set PowerPoints that we've produced. Students can work their way through Monday and Tuesday, whether they're in person or at home. And then when, they continue on. And that's the work that we're addressing with teachers and will be going forward. We've just started, and like I said, we figured out that quite quickly that some basic needs needed to be met before that could really go into immediate, but it can be flexible. And the same thing with math. Math may have some weeks that's exactly what's happening, and they may have some weeks that teachers choose to do like a lesson that's specific to live and something that's specific to remote. The goal was that teachers weren't double planning 10 lessons and 10 lessons.
Right, and I think that, that makes sense, and I think the flexibility is really important, and I think sometimes it makes sense. Some lessons, I think, in my opinion, you can do live, and they could be modified to be an asynchronous lesson. And so it sounds like you're saying that the district is sort of supporting teachers with some things that could maybe be reposted, say in like Google Classroom, some assignments, some works, links like that to help support the asynchronous part of that. Okay, and then my other question was, did you say that students are going to be doing morning meeting together, like A and B at the same time, Monday through Friday? So could you do, what does that look like? I'm just kind of curious, like how are teachers Zooming in the whole class with the students who are on Zoom? How is that working?
So I used morning meeting as the term. That's what we have asked. I put that into the schedule, a morning meeting and a check-in at the end of the day. And so that's one of those things that we're testing right now. At the K-5 level, we don't have the OWL cameras. So we're testing, like, can we work this out with Zoom and see how it works and try and utilize it. And these are the things I think that we just need to go back and reflect upon and see how they're working. as a way to determine, like, do we have the right structure?
And so on the days where students are in school, will they have any live contacts during those days? Like, so theoretically, it might be morning meeting and it might be closing circle or some sort of closing meeting. Is that right?
The students at home, are you referring to?
Yes, I'm sorry. The students who are remote, fully remote that day, and they're learning from home, will they have live contacts with their classroom teacher? And I'm assuming that would be morning meeting if that works out, if that model works out, and then possibly a closing meeting. I don't know if
Yes.
that's also going to be Zoom. And then I guess my other question is, how are specialists working with this model? And other districts have something that's slightly different. And so I'm just trying to wrap my head around the Brookline model, where on the home days that the students are getting their specials to supplement the asynchronous lessons so that all of their live time is academic focused. And so could you just sort of elaborate on how that looks here?
Sure. So our specials, it is dependent by school schedule. So all conservatory will be held asynchronously. So all students grades 4 through 8 will receive asynchronous conservatory at home. And that's because, you know, between the DESE guidelines and the CDC guidelines, it doesn't make sense to have that in school. Like that, we can't do it. So that for all 4 to 8 will be a guaranteed touch point at all schools. It is a mix at the schools, whether specialists will be delivering art, say, or other general music classes, or PE in person or remotely. That was dependent on how the principal created the schedule. Many of them will have some specials given remotely to the students, and that will probably be a mix of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. World language is another class that will have a mix of in-person and remote, depending on the school. And there'll also be potential intervention blocks that will be remote for students, depending on the schedule. So a lot of it became schedule dependent. The principals, so I spoke with and met with each principal, and they really believe in having having instruction for students when they are remote. And so what are those live pieces of instruction that we can provide during that time?
Did you say that some of the specials will be asynchronous?
So the way that works is if they're twice a week, it may be an asynchronous and a synchronous. So it might be 1 and 1.
And what's the reason we would need to do that? Do you know why we have teachers? So I mean, like, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Clarify my thoughts. Like, we have PE and health and wellness and art and music teachers. I'm trying to figure out why we would need to do asynchronous lessons with them. I'm just trying to understand the decision-making process of why we would do that.
Yeah. I'm going to try my camera again because it's easier to look at you guys. But so the only thing that forces asynchronous, and you know, I see in your list challenges and sort of the personnel needs, is that if a special is remote and it only meets once a week, so say for an example, art meets once a week, the schedule had to accommodate more art classes than it did before. So we had to, in order to accommodate more art classes, we didn't have the current teachers to do it at both. And so one of the things that we're working on is seeing, like, where are those FTEs that we're missing in order to have those be live and not asynchronous. And the other piece is that there's been some combining of the cohorts on remote days, not on in-person days, which makes for a larger class. And so a teacher may present an asynchronous lesson and then meet with smaller groups throughout the period in order to not have a large group of students on Zoom.
Sorry, the cohorts are like half the size though, right? So like, I'm just thinking in a model, you usually only have half the students in the building at one time. So if on a remote day you said, well, I'm going to take cohort A from this fifth grade classroom and cohort A from this fifth grade classroom, and that makes one whole class. That would just be one regular size class. Are we saying we're needing to combine more than 2 groups of students at once?
Some of the schools have scheduled it that way. Now we're working, so here's something just to be totally transparent, that we are working to adjust the schedule so that does not happen. But but that's going to take us a few days, and we have until Monday to solve it for the 3 to 8. So I'm hoping it's solved, but schedules have gone out. So I want to be totally, share with you where we're at today on Tuesday versus Tuesday the 26th. The goal is not to have that happen, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to look at that and adjust it.
Yeah, I think that's just going to be really tough to have sort of like an asynchronous PE class and have kids get the same amount of work out of that, or asynchronous art. I mean, I think we'll see kids possibly opting not to show up. If it's not even a live Zoom where attendance is taken and there's sort of an accountability, I worry that I would like to make sure that we move, or to see that we move in a place where we're having like as much live remote as we can.
I think another situation that might be happening in some of the schools is those Wednesdays that alternate. If a teacher is delivering in-person instruction in the school building on those days, the half of the cohort who's home, who has that special scheduled at that time, might have to get an asynchronous lesson on the days they're home and get in-person on the Wednesdays they're in. So I think there's some situations like that as well.
Thank you. I forgot about those.
Okay. All right. Can you talk? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Helen. I asked a couple questions. Please go ahead.
I want to continue on what you were saying. Why can't, I mean, if you've got 7 or 8 kids in a class, which some classes are, why couldn't you just Zoom in the other 8 kids and have them do it at home and your class do it in your class?
So that is something that we're working through. And it's been a discussion with teachers. It's very difficult if you don't have special equipment to just rely on Zoom to be addressing students at home and students in the class. I mean, yeah, at home and in the classroom. Zoom is not quite the right tool for that. So it really does, for that to go well, we need the OWL camera setup, et cetera, to do that.
So we've ordered, to my knowledge, we've ordered some of the OWLs, and the school committee has been in favor of ordering the OWLs, rather than trying to hire new teachers who don't exist.
That's a really good structure for middle school and high school. It's not a great structure for younger kids.
Because?
For a couple of reasons. Yeah, go ahead. Jennifer probably could answer that. It really just,
well, part of it, I think, is it's the developmentally appropriate part of it. I think it's hard for them to attend for long periods of time, and there's less accountability. And so sometimes they spin around in their chairs. It's just that I sort of think the nature of the ages, it's just really hard for them to attend. And the more kids who are on at any one time, the harder it is. And then I think that the part about blending that into the classroom with younger kids is that you've got, say, 12 kids or 10 kids in front of you that have their own things going on live, and then to be attending to what's happening on the screen with 10 to 12 kids, it's just 2 modalities at once. And so you turn to work with these, looking at monitoring these kids. And then I think, trying to see what's happening on the screen at the same time is really challenging to manage it, not just from the adult perspective, but the kids are not getting the attention necessarily in the way that they need. So it's a little bit more complicated. And I think when you start to get into middle and high school, kids are able to focus for longer periods of time, to attend. They have more advocacy skills. They have more self-awareness skills. And so I think that it's a little bit easier for them to wait for turn taking, right, for other kids to speak. And so you just get higher levels of participation and engagement, I think. That's my own 2 cents to it. So I think, Helen, that my concern is that when kids are at home, they need to have as much synchronous opportunities as they can. They need as many live contacts when they're at home. And I guess in a way, if those live contacts, like if there was a special and then an asynchronous lesson from their teacher and then a special, and then an asynchronous lesson. It sort of breaks that up and makes them accountable. And it's a balance of that screen time, sort of like active movement screen time versus like self-directed screen time. So I don't mean to answer for you all. That's just sort of my take on why I think it's challenging in the very younger grades to balance Zooming kids in from home. It's tough.
Except that,
Especially-
don't we have
Oh, go ahead.
professionals in all of our first grade classrooms?
No, this year we do not. We have
Okay.
paraprofessionals that are shared.
Okay.
So, and in our kindergarten classrooms, we do have the paras, but it's after kindergarten and they're not remote. So we
Yeah.
do not have it first or second grade. It's about sort of being able to manage the needs of the students in both places at once, and it's difficult. And I can be more specific when I finish getting through the schedules, even at the next meeting, to tell you what that picture looks like, because I don't want to paint a picture that I don't have. Today was day one, that we don't have the clarity on yet.
I also think is that once kids get up to 4th and 5th grade, it probably is easier. But if you're working with kids at home and kids in school, and somebody at home starts doing something outrageous, you in the school don't have much control over that. You can tell them to stop, but you can't walk over, you can't put your hand on their shoulder. It's not, I don't think it's terribly workable for little kids. The OWL cameras are good, but they are following the teacher around the room. And you also can have in your classroom with the OWL cameras, kids doing things to entertain kids at home that the teacher may not see. So I think that there's a whole lot of management issues when you're doing both, even if the OWL cameras are working. And in certain ways, the management may get more difficult as the kids get into 4th or 5th grade in certain ways, because they'll be looking for ways, some of them, to say hi to their friends and sort of do something behind the teacher's back, kids being kids.
Yes, and I also think, though, that all pedagogical strategies don't fit into having students try to follow them from home. So, as we're being really intentional about our strategies that we use with students who are at home and our strategies that we use with students in person, it's difficult to say that everyone translates, especially having students Zoom in or, with using the OWL camera. So I think we need to learn some more about it before we can address that, but I can definitely look to address what classes are being expected right now to give you to give you information on that.
And I think I have a 3rd grader at home right now who does her morning meeting zoomed into the classroom, and it's not terribly effective, even for that short period of time. And I certainly do not think that there's a lot of periods of time at that age level, 3rd grade or below, where it would be an effective tool. I think it is a tool in the toolbox, and as kids get older, that there are flexible ways you would use it. But I also think there are times when there might be more effective pedagogical tools that teachers will use. And I think this is part of what we're working on with teachers right now, is matching the style and the tool and the lesson resources that we have so that kids are getting all of the pieces of the experience that we want them to have during a normal school year in the times and the places that we have the kids right now.
Michelle, and maybe Emily could speak to this, I'm not sure. I think this is a scheduling piece. How is the middle school scheduling working out, and we're getting a lot of inquiries asking about the middle school model and sort of what that is going to look like as far as scheduling and moving around. Is it the teachers that will be moving, the students that will be moving, and sort of how is our hybrid model different, if it is, from the K-5 model of hybrid, as far as what instruction looks like, what movement looks like? That's sort of one group of questions, the middle school questions. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yep. So the middle schools are school dependent, and it really depends on the spacing at the school and how safely we can move students versus is it safer to move teachers. And so students still will have their multiple course load with their individual teachers who are specialists in their area. It's just dependent on the class. The class, I mean, you know, like you said, we're moving very small groups of students. Some schools lend themselves better to that than others, and some principals have determined that it makes more sense for the teacher to move versus the students, and vice versa. And so it's really dependent on the school building. Our elementary students is very similar in terms of the movement. We are trying not to move large groups of kids around the buildings because of the safety concerns. There is some movement depending on the building. We also have trained, you know, like for instance, I know our PE teachers took a training on cleaning materials between classes. So they can move students into the gymnasium because they do meet the air filtration ventilation situation, but we want to make sure that we have time to clean the material, let it dry depending on the particular type of cleaner we use, and change out equipment. So there's a lot of intentionality around that for the two models.
Do we know if, so just for the older, I'm sorry, Emily, just for the older kids in the middle school model, if they're not moving in the, or even in the elementary, if the teachers are the ones moving, what kind of movement breaks or mask breaks have we built into the schedules for students? Just if students, you know, that's part of middle school, especially for our incoming sixth graders who are probably looking forward to a different kind of learning where you have different teachers and you're moving from class to class and you have lockers. And so a lot of that is not possible due to the COVID and spacing and things like that. So what kind of movement breaks are we able to give kids to allow them for that, and how do mask breaks play into that?
So all of the schools have planned mask breaks. In some schools, the mask break was given to the teacher and said, this is when your mask break is or your movement break is. And in some schools, it was put into, teams decided that teachers would figure it out within classes, how to do that, so that we still got our instructional time. So the mask breaks are intentional. They're there for students to be able to take their masks down, remain the 6 feet of distance, have the teacher remain the 6 feet of distance, not become a close contact, and provide some movement as well. And that is partially what is also going to be happening, like with the tents, being able to move groups of students outside and to have them not have to stay put in the classroom for all of those breaks, because that like you said, they need to move. All students, adults need to move.
Yeah, are the tents schedules ready? Like, are the tents do we know if the tents have schedules for educators to use? What, like, you know, I don't know. And how many, can you just remind me, maybe Helen can actually remind me, this is a capital thing, how many tents per location we have? Is it just one? Is it multiple? Does it depend on the size of the school? You know?
It probably goes 1 to 5, depending on where you can put them. The least is at Runkle, that has one. And the most, I think, is at the Ridley School.
They have several.
Yeah, maybe it's even more that they have there.
They have several. So the principals are incorporating the tents into the scheduling of students, like for lunch, movement, breaks, classes. So I was speaking with Carlin this morning, and she's working with the principals to be able to also use the tents to keep PE outside as long as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to do that, that's a little harder at the schools. For instance, like Helen, you were saying, like a school that has one tent, there's a lot of intentionality around planning for that. At a school that has multiple tents, that's a little bit easier. The schools that have access to a tennis court, that's a little easier. So it's, again, that is a mixed schedule going on right now, but the tents were definitely part of the consideration and intentionality about making sure students are getting movement and getting outside.
So there will be like a schedule. We're anticipating that principals will have schedules for all their tents so we can maximize their usage.
Oh, they're going to maximize the uses. Yes. Do I have a tent schedule in front of me to look at? No, but I'm happy to get a hold of them to kind of share with you.
I just wanted to make sure there was like that it's our intent. I guess the question is there an intention to have a schedule? We really want to maximize that. I know, school committee, we made, the district, it's an investment and it's a really great health and safety measure to have kids outside. And so I think it's a win-win if we can do that, and requires coordination and time.
And some of the classes don't have to be intense. You could, on a day like today, you could be outside, it's fine. You don't need to have the tent.
I think it comes down to
Yes.
scheduling. Like if you plan for a class to be outside and it has to be outside, then you need it to be able to be outside regardless of the weather. If it's a one-time thing where someone's taking kids out for a science walk, that can happen without a tent whenever it fits into the schedule.
Yes. And I know the tents were being scheduled intentionally. The exact use is different at each school. A lot, whether it's PE, mask breaks, instruction.
So for K through 3, how many recesses are they getting a day? 1 and 2, actually. Let's talk about hybrid just because kindergarten's different. 1 and 2, in the 2 days that they're there, how much recess do they get?
So I can't answer that specifically this minute without going through all the schedules. They do get a morning, they definitely get a morning recess. They get lunch recess. There's another mask break in there. When we talked with principals this summer about the schedule and how having students in the schools and working in the schools, there was intentionality about long morning breaks that included snack, mask, and a recess. And their recess at lunch. So, and we have our wellness, our wellness policy, which already has an extended recess. So between the two, there's a fair amount of recess. And I can give you an exact, I can follow up with a.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure there was some.
Are the libraries open in all of the schools where children are now coming in?
Yeah, so that's something that we are working on. Some of the schools initially were using libraries as space for students and for students who are in first to return. I think each library, but there's definitely lending coming out of the libraries. The materials are being used from the libraries. The space may be used slightly differently, but students have access to the library materials and the books.
That's good.
Yeah.
What are we eating indoors? We're doing snack and lunch indoors?
It depends. So that was something that the principals were still scheduling. I would say most snack and lunch, just based on weather-wise, will be either classroom or cafeteria. However, there is the space, and principals have had plans with how that can happen outside. And again, dependent on the school, will depend on the space for the lunch. And that's really like a very tactical thing in terms of like being able to do that. But the option exists in some places and not others. And also for the cafeterias, we still can't have the whole class load in there at any given time.
The whole class of 5th graders, you mean?
Correct.
Even in some of the bigger schools?
In some of the bigger schools, but also there are more students there. So they were determining how many students. Some of the larger schools would like to be using their cafeterias for lunch.
What are they doing now? Having kids eat in the classroom? Is that
But it's not everywhere. That's the thing.
Right. It would, yeah. And I know that our schools are different size. I know this is not a perfect world, and this is not, for me, a choice that none of the choices are the choices I would choose, is pretty much how I land on this. Well,
and I think there's,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think there's an option though to learn. Like, I think we have to let people get comfortable in the building and being in the building, and then recognizing, oh, we can use our cafeteria space because we actually can space the students out. So I think it's about getting some time in to sort of be able to reflect upon what's going on, and not saying like anything is a definite today because today was day one. And right. I always believe in reflecting and changing, we're not talking about changing course like all of a sudden we're going back to fully remote. It's sort of changing course like how can we give students more opportunities to either be in the cafeteria, to be in the gymnasium, to be outside.
Great. Yeah, and I think this is day one, and we'll have to see, how it goes and what changes we can make, as long as we're sort of heading in the direction that we'd like to maximize our space. I do have one
Yep.
follow-up question. I guess I'm still thinking about like the middle school model, and do you know if, based on the scheduling, and I'm wondering, my question really is this a district-wide decision, or is this a school-based decision? What's happening with tutorials? There was always a tutorial block, or a win block, or whatever people called it, different things at different schools, where students, and it was a great time for students who need extra services to get those service delivery without missing tier 1 instruction. And so what's happening with tutorials in this hybrid model?
They're still in the schedule. They vary for in-person or synchronously when students are home. Actually, a synchronous intervention, win block intervention is not a bad thing, because you can actually have students doing things closer together technically. But they are still, an advisory is still in the schedules as well. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to clarify before we move on. When you say asynchronous, do you actually mean like live on Zoom is what I call it?
synchronous.
So you mean, okay, so it's synchronous, it's not asynchronous. So it's just a live on Zoom. Or you're saying, okay, you're saying it's live on Zoom. Okay, because I was like, how
that's
real? Okay.
No, synchronous, sorry, synchronous.
Okay,
So, and again, it's the schedule at the schools that differ, but they will still have their what I need blocks, and they'll still have intervention blocks. They'll still have advisory at the middle school level.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, because we're getting reports that students are not having tutorial anymore. So that, not in every school. I don't want to make any statements like that, but just that I'm hearing reports of students who are not getting tutorial block like that, as in it sounded to me from the description that it was not available to them. And it may be school specific, and maybe that's specific student, it may be a cohort. And so that's why I asked, because I know it can be so valuable, especially for some of our special education students, EL students. For some students, it's a time when they start working on homework, but for others, they're getting support or challenge during that time. And so, was a little concerned, because I know how valuable that time is, and I was surprised that tutorial will be missing. And so the reports I'm getting are that it's gone in some schools.
It may just be a name change thing. So I think some schools called it, there was like many different names for a very similar structure. And I think most people have it under WIN now, but it's the same thing that a tutorial might have done. I do think Pierce had both WIN and tutorial last year, and those might have been combined just into WIN.
Yep. And I can double check again school schedules, but I know that was something that was very important for principals to keep in their schedules. We have had a shift in our specialist staff. Some specialists did return to the classroom this year, and some specialists are the people that were providing it. And I wonder if there's some maybe confusion between the who and the when piece that we could look at.
Okay. Yeah, I think whatever we can clarify for families, that might be helpful for them to like understand if your child was getting supports during a certain time, what that will look like. And I know that's probably a larger question, and it may be, not necessarily in your area, but maybe just sort of networking with some other staff and trying to sort of streamline the schedule. And I know this is day one, and so
it's fine.
as we get bumps in the road and sort of like, oh, okay, we can clarify that. We can further explain what our intentionality is behind that decision, or this is when they were getting it, but this is when they'll get it now. That might be helpful for families too.
And I completely appreciate that, because these are good questions, and being sort of, like you said, like today's day ones, we didn't know 100% sure what the questions that would come into play, but I am happy to look into all these things. They're totally reasonable. So.
Helen?
So I have two questions. One, this is easy. What is WIN?
What I need.
What I need. Thank you. That's helpful. And two, interesting WIN. Was there any thought to do the similar schedule to the high school in the elementary school in 6 through 8?
So
Or
that would
7
have
and
been,
8, either or.
yeah. So I think that would have been challenging because of high school has so many multiple more courses, and to bring, and also having 80-minute blocks would be.
No, I guess I meant more what they're doing where they're having both the synchronous and the kids at home and the kids in school on the same, doing the same class. You
So
know,
at the middle school,
yeah.
it's definitely been in conversation. It hasn't been determined yet. It's part of, I mean, this is all part of our discussions also on what models we're going to use in terms of just whether what we ask of teachers to do. And teaching two groups of students again is tough. The high school, I think that's one of the reasons the high school, asked for a delay to kind of be able to figure this out. It's not off the table for the middle school at all. We are looking at how to phase in that work, but I'm not going to make a guarantee that it's going to look exactly like the high school.
And it may not be in every classroom, right? It may be that certain schools or teachers find it a really effective method that works for them and their students, and they use that in the middle school, whereas other teachers might use some of these other modes of planning that we've been working with them and talking to them about. But I think, I just want to say again, and I know that we've been talking about this for science, regardless of whether a teacher in the middle school chooses to do like the synchronous, what we call synchronous with the group at home and the group in the classroom, or do a synchronous and asynchronous, the blocks and the learning and the things that the kids are accomplishing in that 2-week period will be the same. It may be delivered in 2 different ways depending on the teacher and the style and the resources in that school in terms of technology. So all of those come into play as teachers make those decisions.
And I think, Emily, it's a really good point. We want to get people focused on being able to identify what's the right amount of learning to do over 10 days and the right amount of delivery, and then be able to sort of branch into, does it make sense to deliver it simultaneously or does it not? And how effective will it be?
I just want to throw out there, because if we have some folks who are comfortable sort of using OWL, right, and bringing in both cohorts, right, so half of the class is at home, like Helen's saying, and half is not, half is in the school, and then we have other educators who are not comfortable doing that. From a parent and student perspective, that does not seem equal, because some schools or classes or however it ends up pairing out would be getting more alive instruction than other students. And so I do think that I would recommend thinking strategically about that, and I would encourage us to make a decision across schools, because I think that's inequitable and there will be folks who are unhappy. So I think either for me, and this is just me thinking out loud, as I think we either invest in the technology and we invest in the PD and we make sure people are comfortable doing it and we all do it, or like, I really think this is where we get into trouble as a school district, when we are able to or offer one thing in one school and not in another. And so I just throw that out there as soon as and I get why we would want to let people who are comfortable move ahead, but I think we need to get everybody comfortable so that we can do it. If we say this is a great pedagogical model, this is something we're committed to, school committee is going to invest in the resources, we're going to invest in the PD, then we should all do it. So I'm sorry, Barbara, you've had your hand up, please.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the staffing. We had our first group back today. Do we have the staffing covered as it needs to be in most, if not all, of the schools?
So we are looking at what staffing pieces may come up as a result of, I mean, this happens every year when you open school and you think you have the perfect schedule and you start teaching and you say, ooh, I need 0.2 this, or I need a 0.5 this. And so that's the work we're doing right now, is to look at like a schedule that felt like it was going to work, and does it work, and do we need to work on that. So as of today, we have a few people still who are just being onboarded. So just to be totally clear about that, who were leaving other districts and coming to work for us and had some, in their contract had to stay a certain amount of time. But the the hiring is happening on those people, I think we are still looking for paras in general.
How about subs? Have we had any luck lining up some people for sub positions?
We have some, we don't have enough.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
We're doing.
And I think subs,
Are we going the permanent? Are we going the permanent sub route?
so it's a sub route that's like either 2 days or 3 days a week of employment for a building sub.
Mhm.
Yes. And we're trying to hire and assign those to the different schools.
If I go back for a minute, Michelle.
Yeah, and I also want to go back, so go ahead.
So I just want to clarify that I'm not sure that I would characterize synchronous as as the strong or right pedagogical model, right? It's not that people are moving forward into something that's better and some people are staying behind. I think it's a tool in a toolbox that has certain uses when it's really valuable and certain times when it's not as effective. And so everybody is figuring out when those pieces are going to work. And also each school has its unique scheduling challenges, so that just based on scheduling, some schools may have to do synchronous, whether or not it's the optimal pedagogical method, because they need to keep their cohorts aligned and their schedule requires it. Whereas other schools have a different schedule that will allow them to optimize using other pedagogical methods just as effectively to teach the same content in the same time. But I do not advocate for synchronous as an optimal method of delivering of instruction.
And I think to that point, Emily, the idea is I don't think that the high school, even in their use of the OWLs, is planning for a full-on 80-minute class where the students who are on the OWLs are following 80 minutes worth of instruction from home. So to that point, exactly, because it's inappropriate for some of the pedagogy that goes on during that class. And so I think, again, it's a tool, but Jennifer, I totally appreciate what you're saying about equity. I think it's important to keep that in the forefront.
Yeah, I understand, really, truly understand that, and there are going to be times when schedules are prohibitive of these things, when age groups are prohibitive for this, and there are times 80 minutes is a long time to be on a meeting. And so if we think about just what it would be like in a regular classroom, the teacher doesn't just talk for 80 minutes. So there's partner work, there's group work, there's independent work, there's a model, there's a mini lesson theoretically, and then there's a we do, and then there's an independent I do. And so that's not all going to be. So you might have a Zoom session, and then you might say, all right, now I've done the mini lesson, we tried it together. Now you're going to go and try and do that. And then you're going to turn it into me and I'm going to check it. And tomorrow we're going to talk about it. Like whatever the lesson is. It's just that if we have different models going on in the district at the same time, where some kids are being zoomed in, that creates discrepancy. And we know that that's not where we're going to hear, that's not what the community is going to want, that discrepancy. And so I just want us to be mindful that this is a potential problem. And so in the idea that we can work towards creating a solution before it's the problem. And so we can think about it. And I understand what the parameters and the restrictions sort of are on that. And I understand why it happens. All of that being even, people will still be unhappy if two different things are happening. And if they're going to say, and I understand, why is this class zooming in and they're getting live teaching and my student is online, more remote, and that's an unfair equal number of like live teacher hours. So just to keep that in mind, that's a bump in the road, and hopefully we can avoid it as much as possible. And I think that comes from the spring. That's like a little bit of a leftover piece. And I will say that I've seen a lot of people saying, I'm really happy with remote learning. And I really think the way that our remote model has gone this fall, I think we should take the time to say how well it's been working and how improved it is, for many, many reasons. People being more comfortable, people having time for PD, students understanding it more. It's an investment in time and energy and all sorts of things. I just want to say that people have been giving us feedback that remote model has been working for some, especially our older students. We've also heard how challenging it is for our youngest students. And so I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I do want to say, I think we've gotten some acknowledgement from our learning community, that things have really come a long way in remote learning. not necessarily, optimal for our youngest learners, and that's not a fault. That's just the reality of technology and young people. But at the same time, just sort of thinking forward about how.
No, I appreciate you.
Sorry.
No, sorry. I appreciate you continuing to flag that. I think it's definitely something that we always need to revisit and think about. And when you're, and I think one of the things that happened in the fall was that, there was some leftover from last year. So people really, thought about what are we going to do differently. And I think the issue coming into hybrid is it's sort of the same thing. At the very beginning of the fall, we didn't know how that was going to go 100%. We worked really hard to make it go differently. And I think this is just another change, and that's really scary for people. But I have faith in our teachers that this is going to do, that people are going to have an equally good experience once we work out the kinks and the bumps in the road.
So, maybe I'm a little dense here, and I probably am, but if you could walk me through a typical first grader's day, both when they're in person, Wednesday's different, right? And then remote.
So I think a typical first grade day should look like when students are in the building, should always look like the same first grade day that they would have had prior to COVID, with the exception of mask breaks, which we never thought we'd be talking about, and extra, recess. Students at home, their remote day will look a little bit more like it has in the remote learning. However, there is going to be probably a little bit more onus on having some of that access being done more independently. And therefore, we are thinking intentionally about what's the appropriate thing to put independently for students. And I think in the scheduling, principals have thought more about making sure that there is synchronous specials for students to connect with people and that piece. The one thing that we have talked about, and again, we're just sort of at the beginning of the work with teachers, just because they needed to get some basic needs, figured out going into this. And,
Sure.
and we said to them, like, there's no expectation of perfection this week or anything like that. We have to let them have that opportunity to try things out. We've talked about the intentionality of, like, if you're asking students to do a particular type of assignment at home, it has to be something that they have an access point to, an entry point to. And so, for a first grader, for instance, a long independent reading with a response is probably not going to be as engaging or independent, but giving them something that's read to them that they can listen to keeps them engaged and on target, and engaged in and I've used engaged again, but as part of the lesson. So I think that that's something that, and Emily can talk a little bit to what's going on with science.
Well, and just in general, we met with first grade teachers last week who are, as Michelle said, in the process of figuring this out a little bit, but some of the things that they're thinking about and talking about is having seesaw assignments that are scheduled to come out at around the same time. So if you were doing reading at a certain time during the school day, your reading seesaw assignment would be scheduled to come out at that time. And it might include a recorded read aloud, and then a place for you to input an oral response to the reading, a text to self or a text to world connection. And then there might be an additional follow-up writing and drawing assignment that's responding to that reading, similar to what you would do in a classroom. And the way in which that the students would kind of access that would be through these scheduled things that would be coming out on Seesaw. We did talk a lot with first and second grade teachers last week about the need to help students start practicing and learning what to do on their remote days. So part of this kind of intro into hybrid will be teachers doing some practice on the school times that they're in school of what will happen at home. So kids have clear expectations. They know how to do that successfully. They can do it independently because they've practiced it. We talked a lot about setting up routines that are the same from week to week so that kids learn those routines and start kind of doing them automatically and don't need a parent to remind them or help them do them. So these are the conversations teachers are having and working on right now. And I think that as we move into hybrid over the next 2 or 3 weeks, is going to feel a little bumpy, but by the time we get kind of into November, it's going to start to feel like remote did in the fall, where things are getting smoother, kids know what's going on, parents know what's going on, the systems, they're getting more and more comfortable with the systems. And I think you'll find that on the asynchronous days, a first grader will be able to kind of navigate through Seesaw and access a lot of learning pretty independently.
Even if they can't read.
Right.
Because that's the advantage of Seesaw, is Seesaw has the option for all the directions to be recorded orally so that they can listen to the directions. It has the opportunity for them to input responses orally or through taking pictures, so they don't need to be literate in writing in order to be able to access and to show their thinking.
And Helen, I think something that you also said that I think this was part of your question is, and Emily was alluding to it, but really calling out, giving students predictability for when they're at home. That's like a huge piece of this. So not only teaching the executive functioning skills, which I think our students have learned very quickly, and even young ones, because of this whole experience, but having predictability in a schedule and having those executive functioning skills intentionally taught to you is a huge piece. And we know that the social emotional piece, which I didn't mention before because it's just feels like it's always part of the forefront, but I want to make sure I do mention, is that that's one of the other big pieces that we want to make sure we're addressing, and, you know, beyond the universal screener, but to also be every day addressing students' social emotional needs, both at home and in the classroom.
And how is that done?
The social emotional piece, it's part of what Emily was talking about. So really the predictability is one piece, but I think addressing the building of community and how do you continue to build the community between the two areas.
Do we have oh, sorry.
I was going to say the first grade teachers and second grade teachers were also talking about like, how do you keep your cohorts connected if they don't see each other except for like once a day during morning meeting, and talking about like having ways to display work from different cohorts up there so you could like refer to and share thinking from other groups, and having ways, there's on Seesaw, there's a blog function so that students can like kind of talk back and forth to each other. That also is in Google Classroom and Canvas. Right now I'm helping middle school teachers kind of think about how you can have a class discussion when everybody's asynchronous through using these discussion boards and things like that. So yeah, so I think there's both kind of that connection and community piece. And then like a big part of social emotional is the ability to feel like in control of your of yourself and your learning, and being able to feel successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of these things that we're trying to do are setting students up to have those experiences and feel good about themselves as learners and feel good about themselves as students.
Emily, I think also our team has made this commitment to keep offering sessions for grade level teachers so that we can bring the grade levels together. I know it's after school, but we do have a commitment. We have CARES Act money that we're using to support it, to have open sessions for teachers to actually work across, you know, we're gonna hit a point where that ends, but at least for now, for the next several weeks, providing those opportunities.
Do we have a social emotional curriculum? There's been a number of years of discussion about this, and we've sort of bounced around, and then there was something I think that was district created, and then I don't know if I asked last year, and so I'm asking now to see if we do in fact have one, whether it's something we've created or that we've purchased, and we've purchased a number of programs in the past, and I guess I would include amongst those Responsive Classroom as possibly one. And I know part of my question is at one time we had people trained in many different ones and there was no consistent program. And I'm just wondering what it is that we are putting forth for teachers this year as a resource.
Yeah, so Maria Lee Taz has been working all summer on this material and what is being given to teachers. And I would not even want to step in and speak for her in terms of how she frames it. So I do think it would be good to have her come to one of these meetings to talk about that exact item.
Thank you. I will invite her and see.
Yes.
Muted, unmuted, I'm fine now. Okay. I will invite her. My other question is, actually I have three sort of hopefully small questions. They're sort of like yes or no's, I think. You mentioned the Teachers College. I'm just thinking of resources for
Yep.
educators and for students. Did we purchase the video section? Because you need to purchase the virtual learning versus the regular paper products that we have. Did we purchase both writing and reading for the Teachers College videos?
We did. We purchased grades 3 through 8. And the reason we didn't purchase K1 and 2 is we felt like we actually did that in-house this summer so that we have videos and PowerPoints for both foundations and reading and writing at K1, 2 for the first unit. And we're working on the next unit. We're staying ahead. For 3 through 8, we purchased both the reading and the writing, and then had some additional materials that we made in-house to provide to teachers. And if you're not familiar with it, because I don't know, Helen and Barbara, if you are familiar, but those materials,
No.
we purchased them as professional learning, but we did that as a way that teachers could also use them. They can use them as delivery. So they can turn the video on for students or have students have a link to video that runs through the lesson. And so it's both professional learning for teachers and material directly for students.
So this is different than the Literacy Collaborative.
It's
Same.
same.
Very different.
No, it's the same. This
Same.
is Lucy Calkins reading and writing workshop units. This is the Literacy Collaborative. It's been called many things, but you can Calkins writers were, I don't know. You can call, as far as I know, it's called many things, but it's essentially the thing that we were doing for reading and the assessments. This is all part of the same product line, I will say. And they came out, I don't know if they've always had it, but a lot of people have been, they didn't, they made it for this.
They made it in
Of course, it's a moneymaker.
Yeah.
Well,
So they made a series of videos that you can purchase and they run through the mini lesson. And so it can be used asynchronously, but it's a separate, if I understand correctly, it's a separate purchase. Even if you already owned all the paper products, you now had to purchase an additional access to the virtual learning modules or whatever they're called.
And it's a 1-year subscription. So we're going to have to revisit whatever state of affairs we are in the spring. But that's one of the reasons that we decided to produce the K-2 was to make sure that we had that library built and that it wasn't going to go away. You know, and because the pretty much from 5th grade on, teachers specialize as reading and writing teachers. So it kind of left us just sort of 2 grades in the middle that we might need to address. So that's something that way. And it was built specifically for this purpose. Teachers College also, and the BEF gave us a great grant during the spring to use where we sent 50 educators to a full day session each that they got to identify self-choice on remote learning. And so giving them the opportunity to go to a Teachers College session and then we purchase these materials.
Right, but isn't, but Teachers College is not the same as Literacy Collaborative. Teachers College, you're talking about getting materials from them. Literacy Collaborative, I know that they're videos and that kind of thing, but Literacy Collaborative, we were working with people in the Boston area. So they, you know, the material, the way they're teaching is basically the same. But it's a different method. That we have people from Teachers College coming to work with us. We are using their materials.
So the Literacy Collaborative is a structure that coaches you in the instruction. And so this instruction aligns directly to that. It is the same units of study. It's the same, it's just a different, we just purchased it through a
model of providing that information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not meant to take the place, but to enhance.
Right.
To supplement it. My other question was, is there discussion about for our youngest learners providing paper packets that might be sent home for their asynchronous remote learning at home days, however you want to term it? I know that some schools are thinking about about doing that as a resource for our youngest learners to cut down on screen time. Is that something we're also working on?
I think it's still in the discussions. Emily, I see you've got.
Yeah, that was definitely something that the first and second grade teachers were talking about in our PD last week. And I think most of them are planning to do that, use those days when students are in school to send home paper things that can be worked on, either as part of a core lesson, or the other thing we talked about is the disadvantage of technology is things happen that make the technology not always work the way you want it to. So also as a backup, so that students always have access to learning if your power is out or if a link isn't working, that there's still some way that they can access their learning. So providing multiple ways to do that, including paper.
Can you give us an update on how the remote learning one is working? I mean the remote academy. I'll get it out in a minute. How are things going there?
They are going well. You know, we have the option next week to still do a move in, move out, or in 2 weeks, excuse me, to have the students, you know, but it's in both directions. Students will have the option to either move into the hybrid or into the remote learning academy. Their staffing has finally settled down. The people are in the building. Their specials have started. The student materials are going home. So they've really gotten into a rhythm.
Good, thank you.
Do you also, maybe, I'm wondering, I know that there was work done with the ad hoc task force on remote learning and the subcommittees within that to talk about educational technology and resources. And there was a discussion at one time about what some of those resources might be, or purchases that we might make for software or technology. Do you have an update on sort of like, did we purchase like Edpuzzle? Did we upgrade Padlet? Like what kinds of resources? You know, are people using Flipgrid? And I think Flipgrid might be free, but could you just give us sort of an update on that?
Yeah, I think, and I also think you probably want to invite Scott to talk more specifically. We upgraded several things, and I'm going to tell you that if I tell you which ones we upgraded, I'm going to be wrong. But we did upgrade several things. We are also joining the Maple Collaborative, which I think is really going to be supportive of this work. Scott and I are joining with a third person who I'm not sure who it is yet, but
I'm sorry, what collaborative?
Maple. So it's part of Learn Launch. And one of the reasons that we're going to join is we want to really dig into what other districts are doing and purchasing, rather than just sort of doing this on our own. And I think what we learned with the advisory and talking with them is many of them have really good skills and are at the sort of university level. And so one of the things that we were sort of thinking to move back to is who are the specialized groups in the younger grade levels to help us. So I'm not saying we haven't purchased materials. I just think Scott is a better source for that than I am. But because we've purchased many things and subscriptions, et cetera. And we do have teachers using Padlet. We have teachers using, you know, I could list off a bunch, but I want him to tell you which ones we've upgraded to the higher pieces. And then we're going to be part, again, starting on the 28th of this month, the PLC, that's the Maple Collaborative, to really look at what some of the other school districts are doing around learning in remote. And they're not specific to only remote and hybrid settings, but it will put us in line with other districts.
Wait, I'm confused. EDCO doesn't do that?
This is different. This is a EDCO. This is a particular. I think it doesn't cross what EDCO does. I think they sit separately. EDCO doesn't. Sorry,
we're paying to join this Maple Collaborative.
The Maple Collaborative is like it. Yeah, no. This is it's a couple of $100. It's not. It is not a. It's not a membership fee. This is something we got invited into. It's different. Okay. Yep.
And who else is in it? Just for curiosity.
Other districts.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking who. Andover, Wayland, Wellesley, Chelsea. There are about 40 districts or 45 districts around the city. And it's really what it's really meant is for us to just share ideas. It's ideas sharing. They don't provide PD.
Yeah.
It isn't any, yeah.
But that's what EDCO is supposed to do too. That's why I'm thinking about that and why they're not doing it for the 16 communities that belong there.
They have PLCs. They do have PLCs and we are part of them.
Oh.
But not for every role group.
Professional learning, okay.
Yep.
So I'm just realizing now it's almost 5:20 now, and so we've asked a lot of questions and didn't really let you get through the list. Although I think we touched on a number of the issues. Is there anything on there that that you were like really wanting to share with us or update us on that we didn't get to?
So I think something that isn't totally clear for us as a district yet, and I think it's the only thing that's going to be, something we're working on. So last week, the commissioner announced that we have to give other opportunities for students to move in and out of remote and hybrid learning models throughout the year, that we were planning on just the one. And so I think we are just revisiting that and figuring out when is the right time and what is the amount of lead time that we need. There were some questions about lead time of moving in and out. And one of the reasons that we need the lead time is if we have a large number go in either direction, we need to plan for the teachers to have in either direction. And it's not about hiring new staff, but about like, where is our current staff? So I think that that's just something to keep in mind. And then just plans for moving models depending on the health indicators. That is something that we're working through also with the MOU as to what will that look like. So I think that's something to revisit at maybe the next meeting. And you talked about rigor and differentiation. So I want to be clear. I think this is something that we've talked about before. We don't want to lose the rigor, but we also recognize that it is absolutely not possible to get through a full year's curriculum that had been set before in this environment, whether we're in person, remote, or hybrid. It just doesn't. It's just with the needs to spend time in social emotional learning, the need to spend time in even just breaks for masks and running around. Like, we have to change our focus. So I just want to be clear that we are not dropping the level of rigor at any given standard. We're just looking at narrowing that and doing what it is that we can, and really being intentional about making sure that what we are teaching and the how are very thoughtful and looking at what students need in the future. And it does mean that, in some places, some of those, beloved units may not exist this year because they won't fit into that idea of keeping the high rigor of the standards that we need students to be able to get in a shorter time frame.
I mean, I think that, to me, I think it's just a matter of numbers of minutes and hours and days. And so I think it's inevitable, but I just want to reiterate, I think we should really keep a very high level of rigor with whatever it is that we decide we're doing. And I, it's to hear you talk about the intentionality of what are those things that are core things that every student needs to go to the next grade level with, and making sure. And the reason I had asked about the differentiation is I think that that's how we reach all of the different learners. So kids who need extra can get that piece. And so I know right now we're sort of going into another, if you're not in RLA and you're going into hybrid now, things are very different. And we need to think about how we can differentiate. I mean, what I'm saying is I know it takes time to get used to a new model, but at some point we need to move the conversation to how do we differentiate these lessons? What resources can we provide in our learning management system so that we can provide enrichment and a challenge to those who need it and support to those who need it? How do we benefit from, and I'm sure lots of people are doing this, breakout rooms for smaller groups to provide support and challenge. So I just want to keep that conversation going about how do we make sure it's rigorous and how do we make sure we're differentiating and meeting all those needs. And I think that sort of plays into the question about like, how are we making sure we're wrapping up from what was possible deficits from the spring.
Yes, and just so you know, the ELA team is beginning their assessment process, and we'll be supporting classroom teachers to provide those assessments as opposed to having the classroom teacher. I'm sure you know from your own experience in this scenario, it would be absolutely impossible for each teacher to evaluate each student independently in the reading assessments. And so we're sending out teams to go and like divide and conquer.
Helen?
I'm sorry. Are those going to be done during the time the kids are at home, I hope?
So it depends on the part of the assessment. We can do it when they're at home, and we can also do parts when they're in school.
Well, but it seems to me it's a better use of the time at home to do that individualized stuff than to do it while they're in their class and missing out on the time in class.
Yes, some of the materials require a teacher to be with a student. So it really depends. Our goal is to do it mostly when they're at home.
Okay.
So we're sticking with the BAS this year?
So we are using some multiple means. They have, and that may be something that you would like Joanna to come and talk about. They have redesigned the assessment material using the material through the BAS, but really on their own, using some other materials that are better to be done remotely than to the BAS, which is really difficult to do remotely.
Yeah, that's why I asked. I was like, ooh, yes, remote. That's tough. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it is tough. The BAS just we couldn't pull off in its current format.
Yeah,
and they aren't
labor intensive.
And they are not adjusting it for a remote world. They've been very clear about that.
But we are.
Yes.
Are there, before I open it up to any other questions, was there anything else, Michelle, that you wanted to, I want to make sure I invited you here to give us information that you prepared, and then we've asked lots of questions. Are there any other things that you really wanted to share about?
No, I think what I wanted to just make sure is that we revisit the conversation since today is day one, and that I would never want anybody to think that everything is set in stone and that we don't have the flexibility to reflect and have both teachers share out what their experience is and be able to adjust properly.
Yeah, I would love to have another conversation about specifically where it's not at the appropriate time in the school year right now with everything going on with the hybrid opening, but we haven't had a conversation about the essential curriculum and sort of what is that going to be this year. So I do think that that's part of what we need to talk about. It's certainly, I think, this is a little bit more urgent because it's new and different and people will want information. So I guess I have a question for the curriculum subcommittee members, which is before we close up today, and people can still ask questions, but I don't want to forget to do this next piece, which is looking at our November meeting, because it's October now. And we've set a date, but we had talked about it a previous meeting in November, perhaps inviting some of our different groups of people, maybe Mindy Paolo coming to talk to us about EL needs, steps to success, maybe having Dr. Lozama come and talk to us about our METCO populations and students rather. And now we sort of added Maria as SEL curriculum and Scott Moore coming to talk about the ed tech stuff and essential curriculum. It's quite a list and we can't do that in one meeting. And so I'm looking for feedback from subcommittee members about what would be the best and most reasonable next step. Thoughts?
Well, I think the ELL steps and METCO would work well together in terms of presentation. Then you had Scott Moore, and what was the second one? Oh, social emotional learning. Depending on how long the three of them would take, maybe include the SEL together or put that together with Scott Moore, I guess. I think those two can go a little later. I would be more concerned about the kids in the other programs and finding out how that's working or what sorts of things they may need. That seems to be more high priority.
Susan, did you want to add?
Yeah, the only thought I had was that, we're starting this new hybrid model, which as you all have heard me say, if it, to the extent that it has less synchronous instruction, to the extent that it has just, there are gonna be differences from what it's been like. I do think that the technological aspect, social emotional wellness, and just rigor all go together in that sense of just how the hybrid model is going. When they're in school, are they getting the benefits out of it in terms of wellness, in terms of socialization and everything that we want them to be getting out of it? Or are the distancing and the restrictions too much and they're actually not getting the benefit? I think we should be open to what happens. Similarly, when they're at home, are they getting the amount of content, rigor, etc.? So to my mind, it's not that in the abstract technology and social emotional learning go together, but in the moment we're in, I think the student experience is sort of what holds it together, which is how is the student experiencing education in our schools in sort of Q2 in the second quarter of this year. So I think that those could go together pretty well under that frame.
One of the things I think is that if we have a meeting coming up in November, and I think that one of the things we are going to want to know is how things are going, in a sense similar to this meeting. It's fine to dig into all of these smaller items, but the big picture is we need to be very much aware of what is and what isn't working and where we go from there. So I would say at least half of the meeting should be devoted to that.
So Barbara, are you thinking like an update on hybrid, update on RLA, an update on just school in general?
Yes.
School in general, all the models.
I think all of the models, because they are just starting now. We have some sense of how the Remote Learning Academy is doing, but we don't have any sense of how this back to school, both at the high school level and at the lower grade level and the whole thing. We don't know how well that's going to work. We don't know what changes are going to have to be made. And I think devoting our time at this point to more specific things, maybe we could do that as part of the meeting, but I really think we need to do basically what we were doing today. How are things going? What is working well? What isn't working? What are you seeing as steps for the future?
So go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question though. I agree that giving you all the update is important. I think that's super important, but I do think that some of these people are probably are part of that update as well. So for instance, like Maria being here for the next update, and Scott, really like the social emotional and the technical piece are things that we're going to discover about at the next, and even if they're here to answer questions and then to say like, what are the next things that you want to hear from them? And I think it's always important to have Keith and Mindy, as part of the process, just because we want to be making sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our learners and that we're reaching everybody. So I think you could do both. I think we'll have a lot more information to give you at the next one. There were things that we just couldn't answer today because again, it's day one of the new structure, and I think we could bring it, and if you want to continue that way, I'm happy to bring an entourage next time if that helps.
Yeah, my only thought, yes, and the only thing that I'm actually thinking is that for some of our hybrid grades, they will really have only been in the hybrid model for like a week or two. And so I'm just wondering if the November timeframe is the right timeframe for like a substantial schools update. I think certainly maybe a very short one in November, but perhaps we could do in December sort of another update and a discussion of the essential curriculum at that time. Things should be more settled in December. And then perhaps in November, we could have like a short update, Michelle, about, urgent things that, really we should bring to the school committee's attention. And then perhaps we could invite for sort of short updates. It's all sort of connected, perhaps asking Mindy from our ELL department, Keith to come, Dr. Lazama to come from as our METCO director, and then perhaps some of our STEPS liaisons and PSB employees. to come and talk to us about an update. And I don't know if we could combine those with SEL and Scott. Have I gone a bridge too far? Is that to do sort of like an update on like our EL learners, our METCO students, or our students from Boston, our STEPS students, and then SEL and Ed Tech. I mean, I think the Ed Tech piece is like, it could be 15 minutes. It's like, what did we buy? What do we need? What are the resources? Maybe it's longer than that. I mean,
I think that's way too long, what you were reading, if we want any depth from it.
Well, I think if you're careful in timing and people are succinct in what they're presenting, and we are careful of not asking too many questions,
That's the problem.
we can certainly get a good overview and then determine to go into depth the following time.
yeah, and I'm actually,
Another possibility.
yeah, and I'm wondering too, Emily's just, had a question about like, it perhaps we could invite Scott to come and sort of give us an update. We could get that by email. I mean, if we're just looking for that information, but do members think that they would want to be able to ask Scott more questions, or is an update via email sufficient for the Ed Tech piece? Do we need an actual meeting about that? Does anyone feel strongly that Scott needs to come to the meeting?
So this might or might not be an answer to your question, but how education is going in a remote environment absolutely has to be a discussion and not an email. So can the hardware question be an email? Sure, but I'm not sure, but it does feel to me like, I mean, even today we were hearing, the kids in the Runkle building can't get on the internet. Everyone keeps saying there's enough bandwidth, but what's going to happen when blah, blah, blah. So I really, and I don't mean to minimize it. I just mean that like, I hear that about so many different, the Chromebooks aren't working, this isn't working, that isn't working, that isn't working. And so at some point hardware becomes like pedagogy, it becomes education when it's a barrier. And so I guess to my mind, that piece does have to get discussed because it's very, very, like if kids in the building can't get onto the internet, that's really a big problem if we're putting more kids in the buildings. And if the Chromebooks aren't working, that's, for Zoom capacity, that's a problem. So that piece I do think we have to do in person, but I think, so I'm not quite sure which pieces we can cover by email. Anything that isn't the student experience is fine to cover by email, or the educator experience. I just don't really know what that is.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm wondering is Scott, and maybe I would ask Michelle and Emily, who would know perhaps better than I would, or other members of the subcommittee, is Scott the right person to address some of those, like the bandwidth and the Chromebooks are clearly fall there maybe, but the remote learning and how the technology is working for students to me seems slightly different. That's more of a pedagogy, and that's more sort of like OTL stuff for me. So I'm just wondering, how, we think this is the time. I feel like when we talked about the high school, the last meeting, and we did that update, we talked about a lot of these problems, and I think there was going to be some follow-up on those issues. So I don't know if we need to readdress them. Are they ongoing? And I just don't know. To me, some of those issues are national issues. Like the Chromebook Zoom thing is a problem, not just that's in our district, it's a problem, period. The bandwidth stuff, I think that was a town/school issue. I don't know if that's something that you've been talking about in Capital at all. I don't know if anybody's come with proposals or needs more money for more bandwidth. I'm not really sure where that question lies. So I guess I'm just thinking like we need to set our agenda for November, and what are the most pressing things? Who do we want to come so that I can invite them to come? And what are the issues that are most pressing? And or are we saying we need 2 meetings in November? Barbara's shaking her head no. I'm not convinced that we don't, but perhaps we could try to do, I think our normal meetings are 4 to 5:30. Perhaps we could entertain a 4 to 6 and try to do more of this and not do 2 meetings. 2 hours seems reasonable. We're pushing it right now anyways. I guess I will propose that we do the update that we hear from, we invite Mindy and Dr. Lazama. I'm sorry, I'm sort of using names indiscriminately here. Mindy Paolo who is our ELL director, Dr. Lazama, who is our METCO director, and perhaps we also invite both branches, so to speak, of our Steps to Success.
So it would be Jeanette Lindor and Shoma Hake.
Yes. So if we invite both Jeanette and Shoma as well from Steps. And I mean, if we said we gave each of even if those each went a half hour, that's an hour and a half. And then perhaps we could put on the SEL piece as well and invite Dr. Lutas as well. I would like to attempt that at our November meeting for our update. And I would like to say, let's revisit in November and then do an update on schools, on the different models and how they are going, as well as the essential curriculum would be our goal for December. And if we find that we have significant tech issues, then maybe we have to make changes before the November date and invite Scott to come if things aren't resolved. I mean, I really don't want to be in a position where we are still having these tech issues in November, right? So I'm hoping they're
Yeah. So I just want to clarify. So I think there's been some conflation with Scott's role. Scott's role hasn't necessarily been or isn't necessarily the hardware. And I think that's what's happened, is that he has had to put a lot of time into the hardware because if the kids don't have the hardware, they can't do the learning, right? So that's been, that's fallen to him. I'm not 100% sure that that's where, I mean, his expertise actually lies in the instructional part, and we haven't been able to leverage that as much. So I think that's, so if it is something that we're talking about with the hardware, he may or may not be that right person to be there.
Who is in charge then, if he's not?
I feel like at the high school meeting,
It used to be Karen King, but who is the person now who's in charge of technology, hardware?
So the hardware itself is part of the IT department. I think that's where we're sort of not totally clear in terms of roles.
Okay.
Yeah, because Scott's role is the libraries and the ETSs, the educational tech role, but that should lean more towards the instructional. So I think it's a good question. His team has been dealing with the hardware.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that we talked about in finance, and I think this just might be a conversation that we need to sort of elevate a little bit, is the structuring of the IT department has gone back and forth so many times, and yet we're kind of in this moment where we clearly need more resources to help fix it. I think some of those are envisioned in the budget, at least I've heard them envisioned in the budget. I'm not sure I've heard the vision for how this should work. And so it does seem to me that it falls in between. It's not a curriculum issue, it's more of a sort of structural issue of how central office is structured with respect to help desk and all those things. So I do think that we need to have that conversation. I'm just not sure it's a curriculum conversation. But regardless, what we need is to know that the things that are in the budget are our best guess for what it's going to take to solve this issue. And then we can work on everything else. But the budget, making sure everything we need is in the budget is an ASAP issue. How it's structured, we can kind of work on. We have a little bit more time, not much, but.
Okay, so in lieu of a better suggestion, and I see that Michelle has to go, and it's the never-ending meetings and the exhaustion we were talking about before, and the stress and the anxiety. I really appreciate you taking this time. My suggestion is that we, for our November meeting, discuss ELL, METCO, STEPS, and SEL. And then we are going to need to, and then in December, plan for an update on our models. And at the November meeting, we can sort of decide who we want to invite for that. Are we inviting sort of Michelle, Meg, and Hal and Anthony back, or to do individual updates, like 30-minute updates, or are we just going to focus on one kind? But I do not want to push off too much longer the essential curriculum. And then I think this ed tech piece, I have it on our list. I'm just not sure how and where we're going to fit that in. I think that there's some, as Susan said, there's some work that needs to be done sort of on the budget for next year and restructuring this, because we need to make sure we have the staff we need to be effective and efficient at this work. So perhaps in the short term, I will ask Scott to just, my original question had been about the software pieces and not so much that. I will ask him to email us an updated list, or perhaps maybe Michelle, I'll do it. I will email him and ask him for that. And if we decide as we get closer to November that we have to do this, we'll do that in November. We'll try to make it work. But right now we'll focus on ELL, METCO, STEPS, and SEL.
On the 17th.
In November, the November meeting. Yes, this will be the November meeting. And in December, we'll do an update on the models again, get feedback, and perhaps be able to have a conversation about essential curriculum. Does this sound like a reasonable plan of action?
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna try it. And if we need to make adjustments, then we will. But in the meantime, I'll invite those folks for the November meeting. Thank you, both Michelle and Emily, for sticking with us and for getting us this information. I know you're really busy, so thank you. I appreciate it.
No, and we'll follow up. I mean, there are things I wrote down that I knew I couldn't answer tonight. I mean, you know, because of multiple things, but I do want to get some information back to you, and I will probably send it maybe in an email to the group, and then you can decide what you want updated based on that.
And I'm sure we'll be having some updates at full school committee as well. So I'm sure some of this information will come through there as well.
Okay.
So we definitely don't want to duplicate your work. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
All right, I think we're done for the night, unless anyone has new business, but Barbara's left. I think we have to go. I think we've covered all the new business there is to be. I mean, there will be never ending new business, but I think
This is true.
all right.
Good meeting, Jennifer.
All right, well, good, great. Susan, it'll be recorded if you want to catch up on, it's being recorded, so if you want to catch up on anything, we're happy to update you as well.
Yes, no, I apologize. The advisory committee was in an extended discussion of the high school project, and I felt like I needed to be there to answer a few questions. So.
No, absolutely. Thank you for attending that on all of our behalfs. We appreciate it, so thank you for your time. I know Helen was there and Barbara before, so thank you so much. All right, so I think I'll see you all Thursday.
Okay.
Not sooner. All right. Bye.